This all set up, and we got down to one sticking point with price, which we negotiated.
We set up an information session and no one came. So yeah, hopefully this morning we had another session. So we did 3 hours this morning as well, and had a full session for that. And we did have some people kind of trickling in for that as well. So no worries about that. I think we had full registration for this one. So if people are joining in, that's fine. Maybe I'll start just to give you kind of an overview of the session. So we, as I said, we did one this morning. We did a number of these back in May when we had announced some changes to the licensing process, and we had just really positive feedback from people at the time that it was really helpful to get information out and to better understand the licensing process. And as well, just the kind of questions and answer period was really a time for you to kind of ask us your burning questions. And so that's really just the goal for today. We're going to do a presentation. We have representatives from Health Canada, and our lovely colleagues with Canada Revenue Agency are with us here today as well. So we will do a presentation. It'll probably take an hour or an hour and a bit. We have a presentation which we'll run through, but we do try as we're going through that to touch on things that have been really common questions to us, just so that we can try to get some of the things that we know people will be interested in out of the way, so that when we actually go to questions and answers, we're getting at some of those trickier pieces. In terms of introductions, I'll start. So my name is Joanne Guerra. I am the Director of Licensing and Security for the Cannabis Program. I've been with the program for probably about 1.5 years now, and my team is responsible for all of the licensing decisions. So initial site license applications that are submitted, my team reviews those and makes recommendations for a licensing decision, which gets my ink on it. Any amendments to an application, so if you're making changes to your site, you're filing a request for a new license at the site, all of those requests come in and are processed by my team as well. And we also process the security clearance application. So anybody who occupies a key role that requires the security clearance, my team is responsible for processing those.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline Odie. I'm a manager or acting manager in the licensing and security division. I actually report to Joanne. I'm based here in Vancouver. My team has been responsible for preparing the licensing team for the recent regulation change that happened in October 17th. Aside from that, I have been around for way too long in the program. I started off in a controlled substances inspector capacity. I've done inspections under the NMAR, the MMPR, ACMPR, and the Cannabis Regulations Act. So,
my name is Darren Wiener, and I'm the manager of the Cannabis Program for the Canada Revenue Agency. So I've been working on the program for almost 3 years now, since its inception. And when it comes to these sort of events, a lot of people are wondering, oh, why is the CRA here? They have no clue that the CRA, along with Health Canada, we regulate the cannabis industry. So I'm very happy to be here to explain our licensing requirements and hopefully get the information out that yes, not only do you have to deal with Health Canada, but you also have to deal with the CRA if you're in any of the production aspect of the cannabis industry.
And my name is Elaine Saunders. I'm a regulatory affairs specialist with Health Canada. I work directly under Jackie in her licensing implementation team. I've been working for Health Canada in the cannabis program since 2010. So I've gone through all the various iterations of cannabis regulations from the MAR up till Cannabis 2.0. And so bringing kind of some of that corporate knowledge of how licensing has progressed and has evolved since in the past decade.
Maybe before we get started, can I just ask by show of hands, I'm trying to get a sense of kind of what people's background is coming into this. So can, by show of hands, anybody who is a license holder right now? Okay, 2 license holders. Anybody who is currently an applicant in queue? Few people. Anybody interested in being an applicant? So you're here trying to get information? Okay, that's great. Consultant? 2 people. Student? Other government? Nope, one from other government. Okay. Anybody else that I missed in terms of categories?
I actually work in insurance and I insure all my growers and processors.
Okay, that's great. Anyone else that I missed? I thought I saw another hand.
You talk about the stakeholders, don't forget the mango holders.
My company provides regulatory reporting software for micro processors and growers.
Okay, great. Anyone else that I missed? The back there?
Industry associations?
Okay, great. Okay, that's really helpful for me. Thank you. As well, I see a few friendly faces that I've seen before at other events. Who is it? Did anybody in the room participate in the sessions that we had back in May? So a few people. I see Happy at the back with both hands there. I think he participated in a few of them. So he's a better one to be up here doing the presentation for us. So with that, we'll jump into the presentation. As I said, we're going to tag team a little bit. We've got a presentation with Health Canada. Darren's going to go through a presentation with some of the information on CRA, and then we'll take a little bit of a short break, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. One of the things that I always like to start with when I do a presentation is to talk just very briefly about kind of the overall objectives of the Cannabis Act and regulations. Not everybody likes to geek out on regulations the way that we do. We're kind of nerds that way. For us, part of it, we feel that it's important to kind of understand that framework because it really sets out and helps people understand some of the individual requirements that apply during the licensing process. The Cannabis Act and the regulations obviously came into force in October of 2018. With that, we've gone through now kind of two phases of it. So there were amendments to the regulations that were published this year, actually last year now that we're in January, but in October of 2019. That brought into force new classes of products. The Act and the framework, the Act itself provides a framework with a couple of really key objectives. Anybody that has kind of been within this space for a period of time, these will be familiar to you. One of the really important objectives is really around restricting access to youth. So making sure that individuals who are under 18 years of age are prohibited from accessing cannabis and are not subject to promotional or advertising activities in relation to cannabis. The framework also provides to control access for adult access to cannabis. So it does put in place limits for possession of cannabis, as well as the amount of cannabis that you can grow at home within your own residence. The framework also provides for controls around the supply chain of product and generally oversight for the production of that product. So what we're really looking for there is consistency of production, quality of production, and things that will not cause harm to human health. And we also are looking to control around sort of public safety. So public health and public safety is what you'll kind of hear from us a lot. And so with that, there are controls for how you produce product, your supply chain, and any time someone is not in compliance with that, there are strict penalties in place for it. One of the things that we talk about a lot for cannabis as a regulated environment is that this is still a fairly new industry. We're a little bit over a year. That doesn't mean that people haven't been producing cannabis prior to that. We're very well aware of that. But from a regulated industry in Canada, it is still fairly new. And there are some expectations that come with that. It is quite a heavily regulated environment, and that's not likely to change in the very near future, in the sense that all of those things that we talk about in terms of controls of manufacturing and control of supply chain are likely to be in place for some time. And that means that for you, there are expectations on you for you to be able to be successful. It means that you have to do your homework. You have to understand the Cannabis Act and regulations, or you have to bring in people within your company that have that understanding. Regulations are written in a certain way. They're very technical documents, but there are tools that people can use to kind of make themselves familiar with it, make sure that you have expertise around you to not just be successful in getting your application through, but to actually be successful as a license holder that's producing product to go into the market. The other piece of that is just being able to demonstrate compliance. So as I say, when we talk about product going in, It's one thing to get through the application, but then when inspectors show up and they're looking at your records and they're looking at your business, that's an important part of your success and part of the reason why we come out and provide these information sessions. Under the Cannabis Act and the regulations, you need to have a license to conduct activities with cannabis. So if you want to grow cannabis for commercial purposes, if you want to produce cannabis to make cannabis products, if you are selling for medical purposes, so you're selling to medical clients, if you want to conduct tests with cannabis or conduct research, all of those require you to hold a license. The type of license that you will require depends on the activities that you conduct. So this is a diagram that we use a lot. It is available in our licensing application guide. We use it at almost all presentations because it's just a very simple way of indicating, you know, if you want to grow cannabis, you would need a cultivation license. And the type of license that you would want would depend a little bit on the scale of your business or what you intend to do with it. So as an example for that, within the business model, so depending on the license type, they vary a little bit by the scale of your business. So you can have a standard cultivation license or you can have a micro cultivation license. The difference of those really is set by thresholds around the amount of plant canopy that you can have within your site. So if you have a micro cultivation license, you are limited by 200 meters square for your total surface area of all plants. So that is one thing to consider as you're starting up your business as to whether or not you want to really have a small scale business. There's nothing to preclude you from starting with a micro license and at a later date scaling up to a standard license. And we can talk about that a little bit today. If you're looking at a micro processing license, you have a limit, which is a possession of 600 kilograms in a calendar year that is sold to you. If you also have a micro cultivation license, that threshold does not apply to you. So if you have a micro cultivation license and within your 200 meters squared, you can creatively figure out how to increase your yield while still meeting that requirement, any cannabis that you produce under that license, you can also process under your micro processing license. There are limitations in terms of the types, the combinations of licenses that you can hold. So for example, you cannot combine a micro license in one category with a standard in the other. So you can start as a micro and scale up to a standard, but you would have to be able to meet all of the requirements for a standard license. But if you are a micro cultivation, you can't, for example, then hold a standard processing license. So those combinations are not permitted. In terms of the application process itself, and I see someone taking pictures, so maybe I'll just let you know. I have no concerns if you're taking pictures. I just saw her face look a bit worried. No concerns if you want to take pictures of the presentation, but I did want to let people know as well that we will be sending a copy of it out after the session today, so don't feel like you have to frantically take notes or take pictures, but you're welcome to do so. The licensing process itself, so applications when they come in, are typically subject to a cost recovery fee. We have information that's available on the Health Canada website that identifies for you the fees that apply, but when you file your initial application, it is subject to a cost recovery fee. So the application, there will be an invoice sent. When the invoice is paid, your application will be moved to screening. When your application is screened, we are really just looking to make sure that the application is complete, so that it includes all of the elements that we need to be able to pick up the review and actually do the assessment of it. It is not an assessment of the quality of your application necessarily. So as an example, as part of your application, you have to submit an organizational security plan. We're not looking at that time to whether or not it's a good organizational security plan. When they're screening it, they're really just looking, did somebody submit an organizational security plan? Does it basically look as though it includes the information that would be required? So that's really, it's kind of a checklist. They will screen the application. If it's incomplete, you'll receive a notice that it's incomplete. That comes to you as an intent to refuse. Basically says your application is incomplete. It identifies how your application is deficient, and it provides you with some guidance as to what type of information we're looking for specifically related to that requirement. So it comes as a letter with an attachment, and the attachment is actually quite detailed. We have a 30-day service standard for the screening of applications. That doesn't include the amount of time that it's with you. That only includes the time that it is with us for screening. So if you take a long time to review it and to provide your information back, that's not counted against our service standard. If the application is accepted, so we consider it to be complete, at times it may still be missing a few small elements. We will often allow those to move forward in the process if they're not considered kind of deal breakers. We were kind of talking about it this morning. We probably have about 30%, probably a bit more of applications that get screened as being incomplete in that initial screening. I didn't check the numbers right before I came, but we're probably in about a 20% of applications that actually get refused at that stage because they don't have all of the information that's required. But there's nothing to prevent you. If you missed on your first try, you can come back in and submit a complete application. And as I say, we do try things that we don't consider to be major elements. We will often allow that to go ahead, and we'll come back during the review process and ask for more information on that. The review itself, we don't have kind of a tip-to-tail service standard for the review of an application. We have been working towards a 60-day business standard for the actual review. So from the time we pick it up and start looking at your application to when we would make a decision is about kind of 60 days. That's what we've been working towards. What we don't have right now is the time in queue, but generally, right now we have about 150 applications that are in with us for assessment, and about 2/3 of those are under some form of active review at the moment. So there's about, I think there's just around kind of 50 or just a bit shy of that are not actually picked up for review right now. So generally, once things are coming in, it's a couple months from when they come in to when we're picking them up. The review is done in parallel with the consideration of the security clearances. So there are separate teams. They're looked at the same time. So individuals who occupy key roles, those security clearances are processed by my team in coordination with the RCMP. Yep.
So that security clearance review doesn't actually start when you submit the application and pay the fees?
Correct. It happens, we try to, so as soon as the application is submitted, usually during screening, they try to verify that the correct security clearances have been submitted based on your organizational structure. And as soon as that's been verified and it's moved to the review queue, then they get picked up and are processed. So
there's no way that you can start that security clearance process before submitting everything.
Correct. Yeah, and I'll talk a little bit more about that kind of further down in the presentation, because we've had questions on that in terms of whether we would consider them prior to receiving an application, so we'll talk a little bit about that. Sorry.
Yeah. In terms of, for the criminal background, obviously when you have your fingerprint done, you have that document you send in with your application, does that speed up the process? For example, is a file would be clean, is there even further check that would increase the time, for example, that would take for you guys to do?
So there's a couple of things, and maybe as we get kind of further down the presentation, so what I'll probably do is defer all questions kind of to the end. In terms of what kind of makes applications go faster or go slower, in general, I would say that, and we've got some pretty specific examples that we'll get into, generally what slows down the application the most is the quality of the application itself. So from a licensing point of view, poor quality applications, information that's difficult to find, that's not clear, documents that are missing, poor quality images to be able to kind of look at the site, I would say those are kind of big things for us. On the security clearance side of things, it's a little bit more variable because it can depend a lot on the individual and their background. So things, I think we were kind of saying around sort of 75% or so of applications for security clearance applications are sent to the RCMP and we receive a response back from them within a matter of a couple weeks. Kind of like I would say 2 to 3, 3 to 4 kind of weeks. Things that can slow that down a little bit, individuals who either reside currently out of country or have lived out of country or have had multiple residences outside of Canada, that's a big one. Previous criminal activity is something that will usually generate information for us that could slow down the process. It doesn't necessarily mean you would not get a security clearance, but it may take more time for us to assess it or to get information back from the RCMP. So with that, what I'm going to do is turn it over to Jackie to take it over.
Okay. This on? Yeah. So one of the things that we did in our program more recently in April, May was make a shift to align our regulatory program more with other programs in Health Canada, which was requiring a fully built facility. And one thing we wanted to clarify when it came to a fully built facility, we need operational and functional. So when you submit your application, we're expecting you to have a building for which you are able to basically start your activities with cannabis upon licensure. What we're looking for more specifically though are those permanent fixtures in your facility, not necessarily the equipment that you're going to be using for your cultivation necessarily. What we're looking for is like the actual facility lighting, as well as the wall construction being completed, as well as any space that you're intending to use, any area for activities with cannabis is what we're looking for. We appreciate the cost of like lighting for your cultivation area might be quite costly, so we're not looking for that for initial licensing. It's something that you could put in at a later date. One thing that we wanted to highlight to you guys is that as an applicant, you may choose to only license a portion of the site. And we have this very basic rudimentary diagram that we put together to kind of give you some examples of what that looks like. So what I first off want to point out is that little X line on the outside, that's supposed to be a fence. What I really want to highlight is that there's no requirement in our regulations that you have to have a fence as your site perimeter. You may use the envelope of your building as your defined site perimeter, but for ease of this example, we chose to put a fence in there. So one of the things that I want to show is, for example, there's a couple scenarios that we could work with this particular example. So phase one could be, so that whole big block of phase one and phase two could be one big building. But when you come in with your initial application, you could choose just to license the phase one portion of your building. So the perimeter would still be the fence all the way around it, but you would just not have any activities taking place in the phase two area. Another option would be is that you have the site perimeter in place, you build the phase one portion, and you choose to add the phase two portion at a later date. That would also be acceptable, but the expectation is the phase one, when you come in for your initial license, is that it meets the requirements for physical security and it meets the requirements for good production practices. So guidance documents, I love them. I get very excited by them. I know I'm happy to stick this joke, I'm sure by now. If you're bored on a Friday and Saturday night and you're just like really looking for engaging conversation and reading something really interesting, you gotta get to these guidance documents. So they're intended to basically help you as an applicant understand what you should be doing. So the way that kind of works, it's paired up in two ways. So I'm actually gonna start with the second bullet point there. The physical security guide, as well as the good production practices guide, are about principles and practices. So there are things that you may want to consider when you are building out your facility, as well as when you're operating your site. And then the application guide takes those things that we're talking about there and tells you how do you then demonstrate to me that you're going to be compliant with those requirements. So they're meant to be used hand in hand with one another, and to be honest, there's a lot of fluff around them, but if you get to the meat and the potatoes of it, it's actually quite useful. For example, table 11 and 12 tells you what, for the application guide, sorry, tells you specifically what we want for information and how you submit that information so that we can review it in a succinct and faster way of reviewing it. So you're going to hear me repeat this 1,000 times over again, and I apologize, but I really love these guidance documents. The other thing I'd like to highlight, this presentation, when you get a copy of it, we wrote it in a way so that when you walk away going, that crazy lady in Health Canada said something to me, but I don't really know what she was talking about, you can go back to this PowerPoint presentation and it'll tell you where in our guidance documents you can actually find this information, so it's more useful to you when you actually start doing your reviews for your creation of your applications. So this slide I'm insanely proud of, simply because it really shows the progress that our program has made over basically the regime itself. So you can see here that from 2013 to 2017, we made on average 1 decision per month. We realized that wasn't very fast. So we kind of took a new approach in 2017, and we decided to revisit what we were doing. So what we decided to do is, in place of doing an on-site inspection in advance of an actual issuance of a license, we chose instead to do what you guys are now doing as site evidence packages, where you're submitting video. So it basically replaced the inspection that we were doing. The other thing that we did was we did some process improvements, and from that we got 5 license decisions every month. But what I'm most proud of is in May this past year, we made the decision to align ourselves with other regulatory programs and have a fully built facility. And what that did is it took those people who weren't quite ready to come in yet because they didn't have a built facility. Instead of having them at the front of the line, we moved to the back of the line. And those people who had built facilities and were ready to start operating right away came to the front line. And what you'll see here, and it's very evident just by the diagram there, that we had 105 decisions just since May this year. And from that, we on average have 13 decisions on a monthly basis. So I know a lot of people weren't necessarily happy with this decision, but in the end, for our resource purposes, we're getting our bang for our buck because we're actually issuing licenses because we're getting applications that are at the point where we could issue a license. So the session today isn't targeted necessarily to micros, and I appreciate there are some license holders and some standard applicants here. For the purposes of kind of helping those micros along, here's a table that we've used in our session that we did back in May that kind of gives you an overview of kind of what you need to understand, what applies to you for physical security. In the May sessions, I heard a lot of things about, oh, I gotta do this, and I gotta do that, and I'm like, what? Oh, what you gotta do is this. So these are the regulatory requirements that apply to you. So what I would encourage you to do is in the physical security guide, these sections are actually described in some examples and what that actually practically means. The regulations are not prescriptive. They are concepts, and it's on you to decide how you meet that concept. So we give you some examples, some principles and practices to use in deciding how you actually build out your facility in relation to these regulatory requirements. And then what you do from there is you go to the application guide and we tell you specifically how you go about demonstrating how you're compliant in your application submission. I'm not going to get into a lot of details of this just because we have, like I said, these really good guidance documents that you can use, but I'll move on to the next part. So good production practices for micro applicants. This I am not getting into. This is a lot of information to try and cover. What I want to highlight though, that you'll see there's like a 1, 2, 3. So those regulatory requirements have some exemptions to it if you're doing outdoor cultivation. So for example, if you're doing outdoor cultivation, we're not going to bug you about a building because you're not cultivating a building, right? So the same thing goes for your sanitation program. We're not going to say you need to have a sanitation program. You don't have a building. You're outside. How are you going to have that? So it's not possible. But what I really want to highlight here is the good production practices. It's 80 pages long. I know it's like a lot to read and a lot to take on. Take it like one Saturday, next Saturday, you know, you can get through it. But what's really important about it is that you can actually use that information to decide the decisions about how you construct your building, those permanent fixtures, because that's going to make or break your application when you come in. So looking at this document will really help you, and then what you do is you look at the application guide, and again it tells you how we want that information submitted to us so that we can actually understand you're demonstrating compliance and be able to issue a license to you. So one of the things that we really felt, and to be honest, we used this presentation quasi even the May session, but we decided to build on it. So we've been building capacity over the last little while and kind of seeing, okay, we made this huge shift in May. Everyone now has to have a built facility. So we thought we'd take this opportunity to kind of identify what are the common things that we see people are kind of missing the mark when it comes to their initial application, so it helps you in hopefully preventing you in delaying your application. We're going to go through a few slides of that, and Joanne already highlighted the fact that often what delays most applications is missing information and the quality of the application itself. And this is why we have these tools available for you. And it is literally, you could use it like a checklist if you wanted to, especially those tables in the application guide. And we wrote it from the perspective of my Italian grandmother, who's 87 years old, could pick up this application guide, and her first language is not English, and understand what we want from people. So we really wanted to bring it down to the essentials of what we needed. And one thing that I want to highlight too is, when I came into the program a while ago, we created work instructions for the staff. And it's a crazy idea having work instructions. So then what we did is we said, let's do something crazy. Let's tell the public what we're going to ask them to actually be reviewed against. And so we flipped it on its head and we wrote this guidance document based on our actual work instructions. So when we're asking you for information in the application guide, that is what the reviewer is actually being asked in the work instructions to assess. So we're being as transparent as we possibly can so that you're not caught off guard and not expecting a question from us, that you would understand where we're coming from and why we're put it in there. So one of the things that, it's a simple thing, but can add a lot of extra time when you don't include it in your application because we have to take the time to go back to you. You then have to get the information and send it back to us. So one of that is production capacity. Again, in reference, you know, when next Friday when you're chilling your application and you're like, what was that lady talking about? Section 6.4 in the application guide is what I'm talking about. You can go in there and get the information that you need for your application. But what people actually do is often they neglect to include this information. It doesn't necessarily impact our licensing decision, but it's important for us for Health Canada to understand what is your company bringing to the industry when it comes to production value. So it's really important for us to understand that. One thing in particular I'd highlight for micro applicants, that when it comes to your overall production, you have a cap on what you can produce. It's important for you to not only be aware of that, but also delineate on your floor plans, where are you going to maintain that 200 square meters? It's important for us to understand that you understand that there's a limitation on your production capacities. The other thing is quality assurance, quality assurance person, yeah, that's right, their qualifications. So that is something that's quite difficult, I found. A lot of people are like, but I don't really know what are you talking about? In the back of the Good Production Practices guidance document, there's an actual table that kind of explains what we expect for a quality assurance person to do for their roles and responsibilities. As well as in the application guide, we look to you and say, here's what we need for information. So I don't just want to know that this guy's qualified. I want to know, how is he qualified? How did he get this? How did he get his qualifications? And when did he use these skill sets? And we have very prescriptive things we've identified that actually looks that we would actually look for you to identify in your submission. So I'm going to stop talking and pass it to Elaine.
So the next area where we see a number of information that's incorrectly submitted is for site ownership. So all types of applications, whether it's cultivation, processing, or sale for medical purposes, they have to have the site ownership, and it falls under potentially two scenarios. So there's scenario one, where the applicant is the individual or the corporation, they actually own the site where they've submitted the application for. In this case, it's a simple linking of the account ID in our cannabis tracking and licensing system so that we're aware that it's the applicant who owns the site. If that's not the case, and the applicant is either leasing the land or there's some other agreement in place, contract in place, where the site owner is not the applicant, in this case we have to have site ownership consent. So this is where we see a lot of missing information. There's a number of elements there. They have to have their signed declaration, they have to say they're the owner of the site, they're aware of the activities that are being conducted with cannabis, and that they consent to those activities being carried out. In this case, it's just making sure all of those elements are addressed, and also knowing that there is no Health Canada form. I know in previous iterations, at one point we did have a site ownership actual form that went out with the application when it was a paper form. We don't have that anymore. It's a consent that's written up by the site owner and then submitted to us into our system so that we're aware that whoever owns that site knows what's going to happen on that site if they get licensed. Next area that we wanted to talk about was the notice to local authorities. Again, this is something that's fairly straightforward, fairly simple, but it has a few nuances that can cause some confusion or cause some missing information to be submitted. So notice to local authorities have to be submitted, again, by all applicants unless they're a sale for medical purposes without possession. This means that they're essentially registering the clients, but they're never going to have cannabis on site, so they don't have to have the notice to local authorities in that case. Notice to local authorities, what is a local authority? So you've got your local government, you've got your local police force, and you've got your local fire authority. They have to, the applicant has to submit the notice to them Again, there's quite a number of elements that have to be addressed, and a lot of the time it's just one of those elements that may or may not be missing. So they've submitted the notice, but not all the information is addressed there. And another area that we sometimes see is when it's a senior official who's been addressed to, we're not sure if that's actually a senior official of the local authority, and it's unclear, so it has to be clear what that person's title is and how they're a senior official. And also, when it's addressed to a specific local authority, we want to make sure that is actually the pertinent local authority to that site. So making sure that it's not, a fire department who's over in the next municipality who isn't actually going to be the one who's responsible for that site.
So the next thing that, and I have to say this is probably the one that people fail the most on, is the site plan. So we want to issue a license to a site, so we really have to understand what you are intending to do with the site itself. So having a floor plan that is clearly identified of what is your site perimeter, what is, sorry, I'm just looking at my notes right now, what is your site perimeter, your storage area, for example, making sure that, and this is the fun thing about standards, they have a little extra requirements that micros don't have. So in a storage room for a standard, you have a room, and then you have to have like a room around that room. And that room around it has to have some physical security requirements. And often people really focus on the storage area, but they forget about the room around the storage area. We need to understand the physical security around that. The other thing is often people forget about areas covered around by the security devices and visual monitoring. So we've seen diagrams where people have little cones of like images, or even just having the cameras pointed the direction that they are. It's important for us to kind of just understand how are you meeting those regulatory requirements. One thing that is, I have to say, if you want to save yourself a lot of hassle, is creating a legend. So when it comes to your building site plan, you want to make sure that you have a legend and that you always use the same name or nomenclature for that specific space. So for example, if I have room A, and I choose to call it room A, every single document that I refer to that room, I should use room A, not Purple Kush, not Purple Monster, whatever you want to call it, it should be room A. So that every time when a person who is doing the review, and keep in mind, these people have never seen your site, right? You guys like literally are putting your sweat, your blood, your tears into these jobs. So you are like, you're in, right? And we're not. We're just looking at a piece of paper that's 2D saying like, I don't really understand what this person's doing. So the easier you can make it from the perspective that someone doesn't necessarily know your site to the same level of detail will really help yourselves. One thing I want to highlight as well, again, is back to the micro applicants. It's really important that you put that delineated area on your floor plan for your cultivation space, if you're a nursery or a micro cultivation site, including whether or not it's organized vertically or horizontally. It can't be any more than 200 square feet in total, no matter how you arrange it. Sorry? Oh, square meters, apologize, that's a big difference. Look at the shirt. I am Canadian, you were right, I gotta remember that. Okay, so then the other thing after that is guided tours. So I mentioned earlier, we made a shift back in May 2017 to kind of replace our inspections with these video tours. So you have to come at it from the angle that if you want us to understand your site, then we need to be able to see it through your video tours. The challenge that we have often are that they're maybe not that great when it comes to hearing what they're saying, or the person who's talking isn't necessarily being very clear about what they're talking about. So again, going back to if it's room A, call it room A while you're talking to us in your video. The resolution may not be sufficient, and to be honest, you don't need any special video equipment. It's a joke for us about like, it doesn't have to be an Academy Award winning video. It just has to be a video that we could walk away saying, I have a good understanding of what these people are intending to do with their site. You could use any kind of phone. Most people have a phone that has a camera on there or is able to record video. Another thing is when you do the video recording, keep in mind we're looking for two very specific things. We're looking, one, understanding your physical security on your site. Number two, we're trying to understand your good production practices on your site. So it's at your discretion whether or not you want to mix the two things together into one video, or if you want to keep them separate. But at the end of the day, again, think of me, who doesn't know anything about what you're doing and is trying to understand it, what makes the most sense. The other thing I throw in there is one thing that we do actually encourage the application guide is doing the video tour as if you were like, I'm pretending I'm cannabis and I'm moving through your facility like I'm cannabis. Because it gives us an idea of like how you're intending to operate overall. It seems really silly, but it actually gives us quite a bit of confidence that you guys understand what your regulatory requirements are.
So following up on that, talking about the site plan and the guided tour, which kind of goes to your physical security. On top of that is looking to your personnel security and like the overall security of the site. So not just the physical security, but this is encompassed in your organizational security plan. So this is can kind of be a little bit of a nebulous concept. It's a newer addition to what's required for applicants. It only came in the Cannabis Regulations. And so I think there's been a few growing pains for what's actually required for this. So we've seen some missing information, some information that's just not sufficient, and we want to make sure that we're giving the information out there so that when we get that OSP from the get-go, it's of that kind of that high quality, so we can just do the review and have the information that we can assess properly. So the point of this is it's looking at the overall security risks and then how to manage them. So it's not just the what that you have in place, but also the how. Jackie's taught me well, I'm going to reference back to the application guide. Yes, is our table 10 of the application guide. And that's takes you through all the requirements of what you have to have in your organizational security plan. And then also Appendix D in the app guide is great for the organizational security plan. We've done a little bit of, we've had a kind of a team who's been looking through our organizational security plans that have more concerns. So there's a number of areas that have to be addressed, but you'll notice that there's a couple of highlighted areas there. Those are where we've seen more insufficiencies or discrepancies in information. So the site organizational chart, for example, this doesn't have to be complicated, it doesn't have to be hierarchical, but it has to encompass all the linkages of the company or of the business. So notice I didn't say on site. So it's not just who's on site and what's happening there, it's everybody who's involved with the company and how they then report to each other and what their positions are. This includes parent corporations and making sure that all those individuals are then linked into the main applicant corporation as well. Also key individuals, these are all the key individuals who are required to hold a security clearance. So required to hold the security clearance, not just people you want to get one, but ones through the regulations who need to have them. It's directors, it's officers, it's not just people who are on site, people who may never even be on site because it might be a director or an officer of the parent corporation. So making sure you have a list of who those people are and what they're doing. Another area that we've seen some missing information is in the security awareness and training. Not that it's not there, and not that they don't have it, but it's just explaining to us what that is. So it's really having that description of the steps that the head of security will take to ensure that everybody who's either an employee, a contractor, a guest to the site is aware of what they have to do on site to make sure that risk is diminished, both for them and for the public. Also, for the SOPs, again, most people, they have their SOPs, but they're just, for example, just providing a list. They're not necessarily providing what those SOPs actually are and what they do, and how they're addressed. This is where I'm speaking about the Appendix D in our application guide. We've got priority areas and then the risks under those. So you want to look to that Appendix D, say there's priority area 1, 2, 3. All the risks that are under there, and then say, okay, here's the risk, here's the SOP that applies to that, this is the title of it, and here's a description of what that SOP actually does. Not just saying, oh, it meets this, it's tell us what it actually says and how you particularly are meeting that. So that's what we want to see, is just a little bit more detail so that we can actually make the assessment to say, yes, we can put the check mark beside that. Oh no, this is me. This is still me.
Okay.
And then, and we've talked, Joanne talked a little bit about this when she was going through our licensing process, but this is our security clearance process. So there's two particular parts to it. There's the criminal record check, which is kind of that much quicker thing that you can go and you just grab your CRC, but then there's also the law enforcement record check, so that takes a little bit longer. And in order for us to have a timely review of our security clearances, we want to make sure that all the information is captured right from the get-go from the applicants. So that's making sure that they're providing honest, accurate information, particularly for things like employment history, education, travel history. Those are where, if you find gaps or whatever, it's really going to potentially cause a delay in the security clearance processing. In addition, we want to make sure that we do have all the individuals who need to have a security clearance have actually submitted their application, and they should be submitting their application when you're submitting your application, so that you don't have any delays, so that we said, okay, suddenly we realize you haven't submitted, for example, for a QAP, and you're a processor and you need a QAP and they have to be security cleared, and that could cause a delay. So making sure that you're submitting those, and also not submitting additional people who may just like to have a security clearance but aren't required.
The only thing I'll add to that is this is one of the areas that can really slow down an application. Just because of the way the security process operates, we work with the RCMP. So we receive information in through the application. We transmit some information to the RCMP. They actually do the law enforcement record check for us. And so with that, they're actually going out, they might be going out to multiple jurisdictions to check whether there's anything that those jurisdictions have on record for an individual that might go beyond what they would have access to, for example, in kind of a centralized database. And so, you know, if somebody's has lived out of country, has traveled regularly out of country for long periods of time, employment history, lots of things can come into play there that can make that sort of a bit of a longer process. And so if you don't get your security applications in at the time that you file your application, or the individual themselves submits an incomplete application, it can really delay the processing of your application. We find at the moment, probably not quite half of all the applications that we receive, but probably a good 30 to 40% of them come in incomplete. And so those are things where if you're starting up a business and you've got, you know, multiple individuals, it's in your interest to sit down with each individual who's setting up their account, make sure that they understand what they have to do, how to submit it. It's amazing the number of times that people don't provide the correct documentation for us. And on very basic things, you know, the consent form that we need to be able to share information with the RCMP and for them to provide information back to us. Fingerprints is another example where we don't receive copies of them. So there's really a number of things that if you can make sure that, you know, the ID is correct, the consent is provided, fingerprints have been done, it's really helpful to make sure that your application moves along quickly.
Okay, so you guys all do your Friday and Saturday meeting, get your application in, do all your good stuff, and then you get your homework done, and then you get your license, which we're super excited about. And then what ends up happening is when you get your license, we felt the need to include this slide for your reference so that you understand kind of what happens when you get your license. What are you able to sell? Because at the end of the day, that's all we're trying to do is sell cannabis. So for cultivators, we want you to understand that from the get-go, from the moment you get in your license, whether you're a micro, standard, or nursery, you will be able to sell plants and seeds immediately to either a provincially authorized retailer or to a medical sales license holder. Medical sales license holder are the people who are going to be able to sell directly to medical patients, but right away they're only doing plants and seeds. But what I want to highlight is that these plants and seeds have been packaged to be cannabis products. So packaged and labeled as if they were to be seen on a retail shelf. That's the packaging and labeling that has to be present for you to be able to do that. For processors, we allow them to do the same. So as soon as you get your processing license issued to you, you will be able to sell plants and seeds that are packaged and labeled for retail sale. However, if you're looking to do any sales of any other cannabis class, so dried dried, fresh, topicals, extracts, and edibles. Thank you. You will have to unfortunately come in for an amendment, as well as you have to provide us a new product notification into the cannabis licensing and tracking system, or the other way around. I messed them up. There you go. So for the amendment itself, we actually have in the license management guide for when you become a license holder, there's a whole other exciting document that you're going to spend your Friday and Saturdays reading. There is an actual form that you're actually going to be using to submit this information to us to enable you to then be selling this new cannabis class. And then also the new product notification, it's a notification you must submit to us 60 days in advance of any sale you intend on having of a new product for which you're not already selling. And that again is done through the cannabis tracking licensing system. And so we just thought it was worthwhile kind of saying that from the get-go. So anyone who's looking to be a processor, you understand that you can't start selling these products immediately. There is something that you have to go through first. And we have that there. The other thing I'll mention as well is a part of that process to amend your license right now currently requires an inspection. So you will actually have to submit an amendment request. We'll review it, the paper-based aspects of it. You'll be contacted by an inspector. They'll arrange an announced inspection for you to be able to go and for them to come to your site. They'll do the inspection, and then after probably a little back and forth, they resolve whatever compliance issues they saw. They would then issue the license, hopefully. I see a question. Do you mind if we wait till the end for the questions, or do you want to really ask it right now? Okay.
If there are several processors that are in line, which processor would you say would be the one that's responsible for submitting the notification?
The processor who intends on selling it to the medical sales license holder or the provincial rate retailer.
Quick question as well. How many inspectors does Health Canada have right now?
I don't know the exact number. I know it's over 50. It may even be near 60 to be honest, but I don't know the exact number.
I believe it's 75 nationally.
There you go. She met with them yesterday, so there you go. Yeah.
Sorry, also specific. I thought cultivators could also sell dried flower to other processors.
Yes, so this is for the sale of, if you want to get it into a Canadian public's hands, I'm talking about like a retail sale or a medical sales patient, this is what I'm talking about. Yes, intra-industry sales are allowed right off the get-go once you get issued your license, but if you want to sell it to a medical sales license holder or if you want to sell it to the province or a territory, you have to come in for an amendment for a processor to sell those other new classes.
So as cultivators, we don't need a sales amendment to sell B2B, or we do?
If you're a cultivator and you want to sell to
a processor,
you do not have to come in for an amendment. You can start doing it as soon as you're issued your license. Thanks guys for all your questions. Sorry, go ahead.
How many micros could only sell to LPs right away and not to conventional, but that's not true?
No, so a micro applicant, no, a micro processor or micro cultivator could sell to a medical sales license, and actually that's a great segue from my beautiful table. Actually, it's not mine, one of my staff did it, so thank you to her. No, a processor and a cultivator that are micro subclasses can sell directly to a license, a medical sales license holder, as well as a province or territory like retailer. Again, this table is provided to you guys in the presentation that we're going to email to you, so you'll have access to this. One thing I really want to highlight though, if you're selling to a medical sales license holder or to a province or territory like authorized retailer, it has to be in its final packaging. So packaging and labeling that you would find at a retail store is what you're only allowed to sell to those particular entities.
And you can't do that without a processing license, correct?
Plants and seeds, you can. The other cannabis classes, you cannot. Okay. So if you guys have any questions, we included this email address for you guys. If you are applicant, this is where you send your emails. If you're interested in being an applicant, this is where you send your emails. If you're a license holder, this is where you send your emails. Everybody just comes to this email address if you have any questions related to licensing. And because I love the guidance documents so much, we have a huge list of all of the guidance documents. And again, this is under the guise that I'm hoping you will get your licenses. So not only do you want to know how to apply for a license, when you get your license, you're going to want to know what you have to do in regards to the regulatory regulations. So we've included basically every guidance document that we have available for you guys to understand what your roles and responsibilities are in relation to the Act and regulations. So, do you want to go?
Just quickly, then I'm actually going to turn it over to Darren, but just as well, if people missed it when they came in, we had done a number of sessions back in May where we were going out and talking to people. We kind of went across the country on a little road show. And so coming out of that, we had a number of questions that were kind of the frequently asked questions. So my team has actually put together written responses to those frequently asked questions. Talks about, you know, your 10-2 declaration, how to scale up if you're a micro to a standard. All of those things were really common questions. We had paper copies of them at the registration table, and we have some paper copies here, so if you didn't get one, feel free to come up at the end of the session, and we're happy to share a copy. And we have staff at the booth this weekend as well, and they will have copies of it as well. So it is kind of a handy resource, and it's really just, the ink is still wet on it. It was just fresh off the presses this week.
Yeah. Go over the CRA taxation program. I'm not going to go through the whole taxation program. Really just going to focus on the licensing aspect and our stamping regime. But I want to get the point across is that we are not the big scary tax man that you think we are. We are here to help everybody comply with the legislation. If you need help filling out an application process, we will have an officer come visit you and help you with the application process. Once you get licensed, we will have an officer come out to you and provide a full outreach presentation that explains all your requirements. If you need help filling out your monthly reporting, we can have an officer come out to help you. So when we started designing the program, you know, the direction we got from the commissioner of the CRA was that he wanted the program to be focused on education and outreach. And that's what we've really tried to do. We've spent a lot of resources on providing training, providing outreach, helping industry comply. So, you know, we are here to help. So don't feel scared to call the tax man.
Sorry, Darren. Just quickly, can we clarify, like I know you're saying application in addition to the application for a license. However, in my experience, the application is not being accepted until after you're granted a license for cannabis. So how is that going to be changing, that they're going to be in tandem, in parallel, so that you're going to
So we'll get into that as we go along.
Okay.
But there'll always, short answer is there'll always be a little bit of a gap between when the two licenses are issued, but you know, it should be a very minimal gap as long as the application is submitted on time, and we'll get into that sort of stuff.
Okay, because ours was rejected and we had to reapply.
Well, so very quickly, the legislation that governs the taxation program is the Excise Act 2001. So that's where the rules and regulations fall for the taxation regime. So the objectives of the licensing program, a little different than Health Canada. Health Canada looks at stuff more from a health and safety lens perspective. We look at it obviously from a taxation point of view. So the three main objectives of the licensing program is, of course, one, to make sure that the proper amount of tax is collected and paid to the CRA. We also control, like Health Canada, the production of cannabis and the possession of non-duty paid products. So the movement of cannabis from basically seed to final packaging until it's duty paid out to the retail establishment is also controlled by the CRA under the Excise Act 2001. And also to ensure that any retail packaging meets the requirements for our stamping program, has the appropriate stamp on it, and to make sure that it's gone to the right province of destination. So who needs a license from the CRA? Well, it's anybody that's cultivating products, cannabis products, any producer, so anybody that's basically transforming cannabis, so oil extraction, making vape pens, doing pre-rolls, making edibles, you'll need a license from us. And also anybody that's packaging cannabis in its final retail packaging will also need to apply for a license with the CRA. We don't have any distinction between the medicinal cannabis and recreational cannabis. Under the legislation, it's all treated equally. There is no distinction between the two. And I just want to also mention that anybody who's growing or producing cannabis for research or educational purposes may also need a license with the CRA. So if you are in that situation, please do contact us and we can give you a little more guidance. Unlike Health Canada, where they have 10, 11 different license types, we only have one. We license at the legal entity level, so we do not site license. So if you have multiple locations, as long as it's under the same corporate entity, you will only get one license with the CRA. Very quickly on industrial hemp. If you are an industrial hemp grower, you do not need a license with us. However, any hemp byproduct that you may take into your production facility to make oil or whatnot, that is subject to the excise regime, and you will be accountable for that. Okay, so the requirements to get a CRA license. First and foremost, you have to have a valid business address in Canada. Then we're going to want a very clear and concise business plan. Now, it doesn't have to be a 100-page business plan, but it has to be sufficiently complete to allow us to assess the viability of our operation. You most likely have to submit a business plan to Health Canada for their application process. So the exact same when you submit to Health Canada, you could most likely submit to CRA. You might have to add a little bit to it, but in general, if you've already done it with Health Canada, that will most likely be acceptable with us. But specific things we're looking for is obviously the business locations where you're going to be operating in, the amount of cannabis you intend to produce, the amount of packages you're going to use. Are you going to be packaging in 3.5 gram packages, 1 gram packages? That's the sort of stuff we want to know. Your customer base, and then the quantity of cannabis you're going to be producing. So how many grams do you estimate to produce in your first year? How many grams, milligrams of THC for oils, for extracts do you intend to produce? So those are sort of the stuff that we want to know. We're going to want to get a couple of SOPs from you. More specifically, any destruction, analytical testing, those methods have to be approved by the CRA. So those SOPs you have already submitted to Health Canada, so you can just send them over to us, and then we'll provide our approval for it. It'll be just a rubber stamping because we're not here to, if it's already been accepted by Health Canada, we're not here to say, no, that's not good enough. As long as it makes sense and it's been approved by Health Canada, we'll accept that. The big one, the next point, is a requirement for a license. You have to post financial security with us. And I'll get into that in a little second on how it's calculated and the amounts. And then finally, the way the legislation is sort of structured, you have to have a Health Canada license before the CRA license will take effect. So that's where we have this little bit of a timing difference. So we cannot issue you a valid license until Health Canada has first issued theirs. So there's always going to be a little bit of a timing difference. Our licenses are valid for a maximum of 2 years. You have to reapply for a new license 30 days before your license expires. And the reapplication, it's just like basically starting from scratch. So all that information you applied first time, you'll have to reapply, send that new information in. But generally the reapplications, it's very much a rubber stamping. I don't think I've ever seen a situation where we haven't reapproved the license. But the main thing is to get your application in for your reapplication in at least 30 days in advance before it expires. Okay, so what are your obligations? Well, you have to complete a monthly return. So similar to Health Canada where they have a monthly reporting. For us, you'll have to report, obviously, any taxes that you may owe us. That will have to be reported. We're also going to want you to report your inventories with us. And also on the forms, we're going to ask you to report the stamps to reconcile them as well. What we've tried to do is we work quite closely with Health Canada to try as best as possible to align the reporting with Health Canada. So a lot of the information that we ask is very similar to the information that Health Canada asks, just to try to ease as much as possible the administrative burden on you. The reporting isn't identical. There are differences. Obviously, they're for different purposes, but where we could, we did align our reporting. And finally, in terms of record retention, the legislation requires you to keep your books and records available for inspection, for audit, for a period of 6 years. And that's a standard time for whether it's income tax, GST, or whatnot. It's a 6-year requirement. Okay, so a bit more about the financial security. So anybody that is going to want to get a license with us has to post security, financial security. And what that's meant to do is it's to cover 1 month of duty liability. So the minimum would be $5,000 up to a maximum of $5 million, and I'll explain the next slide how it's calculated. And we'll accept certain forms of security. The vast majority of people go to their insurance company and get a surety bond. So they pay an annual premium to the insurance company, and the insurance company provides the surety bond to us. Other people send us in a certified check. I don't think although it says cash, I don't think they accept cash anymore, but well, we don't have counter service at the Sierra anymore, so you couldn't actually hand us cash. But we do have, you can send a certified check. So what we do is we'll take that check, we'll deposit it into the CRA bank account, and then whenever the license isn't required, either it's canceled by you or canceled by the CRA, we'll refund that security deposit for us. In the last session, somebody asked, well, do you guys pay interest on that? And the answer is no, we don't.
Do you collect interest on it?
If you do want interest, you can submit as security Government of Canada bond. So that's where you go on the open market, purchase this non-certificated Government of Canada bond, submit that to us, and that does continue to accrue interest. But that, I don't, like, in many, many years, I can count on my hands the number of times somebody submitted a Government of Canada bond security. It's not very common. The vast majority of people just get a surety bond from their insurance company. So they pay an annual premium just like a normal insurance policy. Okay, so how is it calculated? So if you're only doing cultivation, so that means you will never be paying us any money. The security that you have to post is $5,000. If you are going to be packaging product, then we have this long formula on how to calculate security. But basically, what we wanted to do is estimate the total amount of liability you'll have in your first year and divide that by 12, and that's what we ask you to post. And then on an annual basis, we do an annual security review. And if you need to post more security, we'll ask you to increase it. If you need to post less, then you can ask for a decrease. So we do review it on an annual basis to make sure that you only post what's required under the legislation.
Will this be part of the email you send out at the end of this?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really long formula, but it's not as daunting as you think. Okay, there's a... Yeah.
We'll give you the formula. So you can calculate it.
So we created this little chart here for you that just sort of summarizes the Health Canada licenses and whether or not you would require a CRA license. And then also, and I'll talk in another minute about the stamp regime, whether it's required or not. If you come down to our booth, we're in 1433 beside the Health Canada booth. We do have this little graph available we can give out to you. Okay, so here's the other important information and some of the points that I really want to emphasize. You should be submitting your application for a CRA license at the same time as you submit your Health Canada license. Okay, so make sure you submit it at the same time. We normally have a 30-day turnaround time to approve a license. So as long as all your application is completed properly, it doesn't, it takes about a month for us to process a license application. Many times it's a little faster. So, but normally within 30 days we can approve a license. We do not have a license application fee, so there's no fees to receive a license. And this one is particular. I want to emphasize. You cannot possess any cannabis until you receive your CRA license. So that is quite important. If you do, you are subject to penalties and potentially seizure of the product. But that would be in a very egregious or, a very, egregious situation. But you must have your CRA license prior to possessing cannabis.
How does that work in conjunction with the 1072?
Yep, so, very good question. So the legislation is very clear. You cannot possess cannabis until you have your CRA license. However, we do recognize that Health Canada has allowed this declaration to take, to bring genetics into the legal market. And so administratively, we will allow you to possess that cannabis that you've made on your declaration. So when we do our licensing application, we'll ask you, have you made a declaration in Health Canada? If you say yes, I will be calling up Jackie. She will tell me exactly what the declaration was. When we issue your license, we will come out and visit. We will do an inventory count. If you have anything in excess of your declaration, you will be assessed a penalty and potential seizure. If you're within your declaration, we're all good. So, the question you asked before about sort of the timing, really, when Health Canada issues your license, as long as everything is, the paperwork is all done and whatnot, we'll know that the license has been issued. We'll contact you. We'll say, all right, we know your Health Canada is issued. You'll give us the bond or the check, and then we'll issue the CRA license. So really, the timing difference should only be about a week, as long as all your CRA paperwork is in place. What we found in sort of the past is that, and this is one of the main reasons why we're here talking, is that people who got their Health Canada license had no understanding or clue that they needed a CRA license. They started taking possession of products, started cultivating, started doing their activities, and unfortunately, once we found out about it, we went out and we have issued penalties for that. So the main thing I want to emphasize is please get your applications in if you've submitted an application in Health Canada.
For what it's worth, people on the phone at CRA tell you the opposite. They tell you to apply once you have your Health Canada license number.
Okay.
For what it's worth.
Is there any consequences to amendments on applications? It would cover once you have your license in general?
In terms of your products you want to
Yes,
produce?
if you do amendments or even to size or
So if the only time there's no, you only have to inform us if you're going to be adding a different site. But if you want to expand, you don't need to inform us.
Okay, so amendments of a different site but on the same property or on a different address?
It could be a different address. We just need to know the locations where you're going to be operating. So,
okay.
And like I said before, as long as that location is part of your same corporation, you do not need a separate license. You just need to inform us, and then you can choose those activities on that location. You can report them separately, or you can report them consolidated. And that's the only thing we'll ask you. How do you want to file separate returns, or do you want to file a consolidated return? But we need to know where the location is, because obviously at some point we're going to have auditors come out and visit you, so we obviously need to know where you're operating.
So just to update your
Yep, just send them an email, call them, fax them in something, that'd be great. We do accept faxes still. So that's our main technical notice on licensing. If you go downstairs, we do have that available. You can email us and we'll send that out to you also. Okay, so very quickly on the stamping regime. So who needs to actually register for the stamping regime? Basically, anybody that's packaging product in the final retail packaging must register for the stamping regime. So the stamp sort of indicates that, it does indicate that the excise duty has been paid on the product. And it's also been used as sort of marketed as that, whether rightly or wrongly, that if a product has a stamp on it, you can be somewhat rest assured that it has come from a legal supply, a legal producer. So that's one of the ways that consumers can have some confidence that they're buying legal product, is when they see the excise stamp on it. So the stamp has these various security features in there. I won't go into it, but basically it allows law enforcement, they have little machines that they can test on it to see whether the stamp is valid or not. Okay. What else do we want to talk about here? Like I said, anybody that's packaging product required to register the stamp regime. Only people that have registered for the stamp regime can possess stamps. Another question I got in the last session is, can one producer possess my stamps? The answer is no. You can only possess stamps that were issued to you. Like I mentioned before, every month when you file your monthly reporting to us, you'll have to account for your stamps. And the big point, the last bullet, you are accountable for the stamps. So if you do have them, please do not lose them. There is a potential penalty of up to $30 a stamp. So it's quite a heavy penalty. So please guard those very carefully and make sure if you are packaging, stamping, that you have the proper protocols, procedures in place so you don't lose those stamps, because there is a potential of very large penalties. Here are the basic requirements on how you have to fix the stamp to a package. Has to be on a conspicuous place on the package. Has to seal the package, that's the big one. Remain fixed on the package after it's open, so the stamp gets torn. Does not interfere with security features. And the other one that we don't want you to put the stamp over Health Canada's warning labels. That's important. You have to have the right, everybody has to be able to read the warning labels. So the stamp can't go over Health Canada's informative labels. A stamping ordering system, an online system that you use to order the stamps. You can order sample stamps through there. So if anybody is going to want to package, you can order sample stamps to figure out how you're going to apply them. The stamps come dry, so there is no adhesive on the stamps when you order them. And the reason why it's done that way is that there's a multitude of different packaging in the cannabis industry. So we didn't want to come and develop a certain adhesive that might not work for all packaging. So we leave it to the licensees to figure out how to best affix the stamp to the packages. So you can either source your own adhesive, or there are companies that will provide a service to put adhesive on the stamp. Canadian Banknote, who is the stamp provider, does provide that service. There's another company in Ottawa called Label Innovation that does provide that service. So we leave it up to you to decide how best to figure out how to stamp the product. We'll also help you if you have certain types of packaging. You're new. You have a new type of package you want to introduce into the market. You're not sure if the stamp is applied correctly. You can ask us. You can send us samples. We will tell you whether it's good or not good, whether it meets the requirements of the legislation. So it's not like you'll send out the stuff to the provincial boards and then they'll send it back because it wasn't stamped properly. Call us, let us know. We will come out, look at your packaging to make sure it's compliant, or you can send us samples and we'll let you know. So we are there in that respect to help you as well.
Does a product with less than 0.3 THC need sales?
No, they don't. So any product that has less than 0.3% THC weight for weight does not require an excise stamp, and it's not subject to excise duty. Now that exemption only applies for dried flower and for oil. It does not apply for edibles. It does not apply for topicals. So it does not apply to beverages.
Oh, it's seeds.
Those require a stamp, and those are taxable.
Do the stamps have a value you place on the stamp when you put it on?
No. So it's not like when you order the stamps, you're prepaying the duty. They cost, I think, 1/2 cent each.
No, but what's the value of the stamp?
It doesn't have any value. It just represents that the tax has been paid. So it has no...
You don't have to put 28 of them on an ounce. It's not a buck a piece or something. I didn't understand that.
Sorry. So we only have one stamp.
Yeah.
So it could, it's the same stamp that goes on a 1 gram joint or a 30 gram container. It's the same stamp.
And a record is made every time the stamp is applied? So I mean, there's some kind of accounting fact that stamp went on that product?
Well, so we don't ask you to, like the stamps have serial numbers, we don't ask you to account, this serial number went onto that package. You just have to be accountable for the stamps. So if you had, if you sold 5,000 packages, we should have in your records that 5,000 stamps went on those packages. So here's what they look like. Every province and territory has their own unique stamp color. It's quite important to make sure that any cannabis, for example, that has the Ontario stamp is only destined for Ontario. You should never, in a retail setting, if you're going into a dispensary, like in BC, see a stamped product from a different jurisdiction. If you do see that, please let us know, because that's a problem.
We don't have inter-Canadian shipping. We can't ship BC budget anywhere else but BC with a stamp on it?
You can ship it to Ontario, but you need to put Ontario stamp on it. So let's say you're operating in BC and you're selling into Ontario and Nova Scotia. That product you sell into Ontario, you put the Ontario stamp on it. The product you sell in Nova Scotia, you put the Nova Scotia stamp on it. So that's our technical notice that explains everything on how the stamping program works. And once again, it is down at our booth. We're more than happy to give you a copy of it. Here's some contact information. The best way to get hold of us is either by email or through our 1-800 number. In general, all calls or emails are returned on the same day, if not 24 hours at the most. So we do get back to you very fast. You know, you won't be waiting for a month for a reply. We'll get to you, you know, normally within the same day. I think that's all I wanted to talk about. I think we're going to take a short break there, John.
Yeah, so what we'll do is just take kind of a quick 10 to 15 minute bathroom break, people to catch their breath, stretch their legs, and then we'll come back and the rest of the session will just be questions and answers. Thanks.